Welcome back to the channel, everybody, and today it's my number one team in my 2023 NFL Deep Dive Series, the San Francisco 49ers. Make sure to hit the like, leave a comment, help boost the algorithms, and we're finally here. I just want to say right here at the top, for anyone that watched this series throughout, the people that subscribed, I saw a little bit of a boost here for this channel, and I really appreciate everyone that participated in this series in the comment sections. Shout out to Carolina fans for being so pissed off at me. You got a whole season to prove me wrong. But what can I say? There's a couple things I wish I would have done differently format-wise, but you live and you learn as you go along, and we'll see next year a little differences that I'll make. But overall, I had a lot of fun doing this, and now it's the number one team, the 49ers. And when I was putting the grades together, I was high on the 49ers. I thought they were going to win a lot of games this year. And then was when I really started to look at the players on the roster, go player by player, position group by position group. I was really struggling to find out where the weakness was on this team. Yes, they've had a lot of turnover at the defensive coordinator position, but they brought in Steve Wilks, who perhaps should be the head coach in Carolina. Many would argue that. Shout out to Carolina fans again. But they got Kyle Shanahan. He's just so inventive. He's modernized an older system that was really dominant for a long time, sort of brought it back to prominence here in the modern day since he, was an offensive coordinator in Atlanta and then really applied it full on and made adjustments to it, little tweaks here and there to make it just such a juggernaut here in San Francisco. They haven't really added a whole lot of talent on the offensive side of the ball. They sort of just maintained what they had from last year. They did lose Mike McGlinchey, the right tackle, and they replaced him in-house with Colton McKivitz. We'll get to that offensive line. Again, the only red flag I really could find was the offensive line. But they still got Trent Williams, who's one of the best, if not the best in the business. Christian McCaffrey, probably the best overall running back in the league in terms of just the modern style. The depth that they have with Elijah Mitchell. They got Debo, who can, play receiver. He can line up in the backfield. They got George Kittle, who's going to get that great run after the catch and make everyone look good. Brandon Ayuk, sort of the same thing. Kyle Juszczyk, who's going to be that really, again, stay that under the radar, but really essential cog in the wheel of this offense. That's going to drive Brock Purdy, who literally ran Trey Lance out of town, who they invested so highly in. He got traded to Dallas. They brought Sam Darnold to be the backup. Maybe this revitalizes his career. And I think the career that's set up to be revitalized the most is Steve Wilks in the head coaching discussion. I think he sort of got that consideration last year, but no one really stuck with it. I think the offensive mind is really what's coveted in terms of new head coaches. But man, you look at some of the best defensive coaches that have come out to be head coaches. Two of them in the last 3 years came from this San Francisco team and this Kyle Shanahan staff. Robert Saleh, DeMeco Ryans just this past year. So there's no telling what a team might do when they see Steve Wilks take over what, by my estimation, we'll get to the overall grades, the best defense in the NFL. Superstars all over the field. From Bosa, Hargrave, who they just brought in free agency, Fred Warner, who's probably the best, if not the best middle linebacker in the league. Then they got Charvarius Ward, who really had established himself last year in an interesting way as being a number one corner in the league in his own sort of way. Breakout stars like Tolonia Ofanga. And they didn't really lose, again, a lot of significant guys. And if they did, they replaced that with a significant player. Like they lost Jimmy Ward, but they also signed Javon Hargrave. So that's going to help out. You boost up the front end, the front four, to help the back end, where they still have Deshaun Gibson out there. They also drafted Jair Brown. Their draft was questionable. I will say that here at the top. I'll talk about that a little bit again more shortly. I'll talk about it more shortly from now when we get to the coaching grades. But I do question that because the offensive line is so bad. They invested highly in linebackers and kept a lot in the 53-man roster. I do question that strategy, but until they show that it's not going to work, I can't just come here and just doubt them, because it is probably the best front office in the league. The front office and coaching staff combination is probably the best in football. It would be hard pressed to find another one. Maybe it would be what they got in Philadelphia, but I mean, John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan combination has been undeniably great. And if they would have played in the Super Bowl last year, no doubt in my mind, had they not run out of quarterbacks. Because Brock Purdy was executing the system perfectly. And then last minute, they had to throw in a quarterback who hadn't been on the team, who hadn't worked. And then eventually they had no quarterbacks and couldn't even throw the ball. So it just allowed that Philadelphia defense to just run the whole game. And it really did cause a disservice, I think, to the overall spirit of the NFC Championship game. But, maybe that problem won't exist now because of that. They have the emergency quarterback rule, so they're going to have Brandon Allen sitting in the wings in case Purdy gets hurt and Darnold goes down again. But let's start with talking about what I think is what's really going to drive this team forward into this number one spot, along with the defensive talent. But it's the offensive mind and the culture setting of Kyle Shanahan and this coaching staff. So this is my number 3 coaching staff in the league right now, and so much of that has to do with Kyle Shanahan. They did lose DeMeco Ryans. They've lost now 2 defensive coordinators, I think, in 3 years, which is a really rough transition to go through. But, Shanahan brought in Steve Wilks, who many argued should have gotten that Carolina job. I understand they wanted to move on. They wanted to get an offensive guy in there. Carolina fans do not like my opinion of Frank Reich, if you go and read the comment section on that video. But I do think it was a better option than Steve Wilks. I think Steve Wilks just sort of came into a situation where that team was just horrifically coached prior to that. So any type of structure or change of pace, I think, was going to do that roster good. But he's also inheriting a level of talent, and we'll get to that eventually, that is really unheard of. This is one of the best defenses, period, across the board. People want to talk about the Jets defense, and yes, they're very good. But this defense that Steve Wilks is going to get to work with, Bosa hasn't signed his contract extension yet. That's going to happen before their first game for sure. He's getting all these really these guys that have been established by Robert Saleh and DeMeco Ryans before him, to be super aggressive in the run game and, really dedicated to that pass rush. And he's really getting a better version of the front four because he gets to now work with Javon Hargrave. We'll get to him as well. So I don't think Steve Wilks has ever worked with a level of talent like this. We saw how much he got out of a significantly less talented group in Carolina, taking nothing away from them, of course, but this is like a whole other level. So it'll be interesting to see. Will really, I think, be the true test of how good Steve Wilks really is, because he's getting basically thrust into a impossible to lose situation. Like, it's impossible with the level of talent they have, barring some type of significant injuries, that this is not going to be a top 5 defense. And when you get a guy like Steve Wilks, who's a really good defensive coach in general, he should be able to quite easily position this roster and the group that he has strategically into positions where this team is going to be dominant. And that's the thing about Kyle Shanahan, I think, that he's really realized since he got here to San Francisco all those years ago, is that they've really dedicated to having a really strong defense and then allowing the Shanahan system on the offensive side to sort of lead the way, and them getting tradesy players. We just saw it with what happened with Trey Lance, that they tried to invest highly in a quarterback and do what the rest of the league does. And it turns out that for their system, the last pick in the draft is probably a better option, and is, I think, so far proven to be undoubtedly a better option, Brock Purdy, and we'll get to that as well. I like this dynamic here, in that back in like 1990, the late 90s, early 90s, late 90s, into the early 2000s, Kyle's dad, Mike Shanahan, was the coach of the Broncos, and Gary Kubiak was his offensive coordinator. And now his son, Kyle Shanahan, is a head coach, and his offensive coordinator, one of them is co-offensive coordinators, is Gary Kubiak's son, Clint Kubiak. So I really like that dynamic of like two guys who probably grew up together in the same locker room, sat at the learning tree of the same guys who now have like supplanted them as the next generation. But overall, the Shanahan system really does do a great job, better than pretty much any other system, going even back to his dad, where he kind of derives this from. He puts a much more modern twist on it. But the great thing about the Shanahan offense for the last 25 years has been that it really hides the weaknesses of a lot of players. It really puts running backs in particular, and great talent, patient runners, one-cut runners in particular, in position to really have high levels of success. It's hard to find a year where Shanahan's offense wasn't being run in one way, shape, or form, either by a Shanahan or a Kubiak, where the running game wasn't at the top of the league. It's because it's so easy to dedicate to it. Guys, Terrell Davis, Clinton Portis, Mike Anderson, Arian Foster, all like keep going all the way down the line. All these guys who, I think outside of Clinton Portis, weren't like highly sought after draft picks. They were very traitsy types that were put into the system. I think Clinton Portis was a first round pick. I could be wrong about that. I just feel like he was. And now but then he went out last year and he got Christian McCaffrey, and that really put the offense over the top because McCaffrey just happened to be a high level talent that suited this new modernized version of that Shanahan offense. Where he's going to have some deficiencies, and I have questioned Shanahan and Lynch in particular in the past 2 years now, is how they've built this offensive line. Their offensive line has gotten progressively worse in terms of talent over the last 2 years, and this might be the worst offensive line that they've really had to work with in a while. Outside of Trent Williams, there's not anything really going on here. There's a lot of like hoping that these young guys who are in like their second year and third year, like Aaron Banks and Spencer Burford, that they're going to succeed. You know, Jake Brendel, he's like not terrible, but you can definitely have done better than him as well. There was a lot of options in this last draft where I think they could have done much better than what they did. And I feel like, I don't want to say that they wasted draft picks, but I do feel like to a degree they could have done a lot better with the picks that they had. I mean, they drafted linebackers and defensive ends when that's really not a position of need for this team. I feel like they could have used those picks on offensive linemen. We'll get to those offensive lineman grades, but I still think that overall, this is the best coach to have in this situation. And I think nothing against Kubiak and Wilkes and them, but the fact that there's continuous turnover in the coordinator positions, it seems, on this team, and losing great minds like McDaniel and whoever, you know, McVay was with Shanahan for a while. You know, they're all sort of like connected together in one way, shape, or form as a member of his staff across multiple teams. I think that if he was able to find some sort of stability, the problem is that, you know, you lose Saleh and D'Amico Ryans, who should be head coaches. And this, I think, is a great opportunity for Steve Wilkes. He might be somebody, Kyle Shanahan, through this San Francisco team that might actually be able to be so good at his job and so good at team building along with John Lynch, and so good at setting up a culture with a specific scheme, a specific style of offense that then puts the defense in such great position to really succeed and make the coordinator look like a super genius, that Steve Wilkes might be in the head coaching conversation next year. And even if he isn't, I think that getting a second year with this roster, getting used to the style that Shanahan wants to do, could also do Steve Wilkes a tremendous service. But I do think that Clint Kubiak is sort of being now put into a position where he might end up being the belle of the ball come the 2024 offseason if this team with Brock Purdy proves that last year wasn't a fluke. Then they'll really be like, okay, this offensive style, we need to get a coach from this staff because look what they did with Brock Purdy. Oh my God, we have whoever at quarterback. You know, you got to think about, you know, we're gonna get Caleb Williams in the draft next year. We need to get Clint Kubiak because we want to put that system in. So just think about what Caleb Williams will do the way Brock Purdy just did it. And I think that is just Shanahan coaching tree is going to become probably the next most sought after tree to come from. And a lot of that has to do with Kyle Shanahan, who's probably the best head coach in the NFL. I think he's certainly up there with Belichick and Andy Reid. I think in terms of a modern view of the game, he's probably one or two. But it is kind of brought down by the coordinator positions, but not significantly. Not significantly. I'm not knocking these guys, but a little bit. Third place. So now let's talk about the quarterback, and it's Brock Purdy, who gets a 75 coming out. I understand Brock Purdy's only lost one game in his NFL career. I think he's 7-1 if you include the playoffs in games that he started. He fits what Shanahan wants. He's sort of just like another Jimmy Garoppolo to a degree. Like, I think that people were more blown away with what he was doing because of where he was drafted, and the expectations were so incredibly low for him, more so than he was actually doing tremendous things. Sure, there was some moments there, but I think in general it was just him being very efficient, trusting that the system was going to run guys open, run the right guys open at the right time, and it was a really easy 1 to 2 reads at most that he was having to do. And he was having to do it with guys like George Kittle, who's probably one of the best receiving tight ends in the league right now. He's probably maybe he's 2 or 3, I would say. Kelsey being number 1, and then it's like him and Mark Andrews sort of competing for that number 2 receiving tight end spot. And then, Christian McCaffrey always kept them honest with the run game, so the play action game worked out really well for Purdy. And I think that's going to continue. And especially with the way the offensive line is structured and just the system in general, he's going to really stay in that world where the play action game is going to work, the shallow crosses are going to work, lots of the motion and just having Deebo Samuel out there running certain routes, Brandon Ayuk being a good route runner, and you're hoping to get a little bit more from him. He's really got probably the best group of weapons overall from top to bottom, receivers, tight ends, running backs, and the variety of talents that they have. It's probably the best group. So he's in a situation where it's hard to not succeed unless you're completely incompetent. And I do think that he's proven to be, at least up to this point, the perfect quarterback for the system, like Jimmy Garoppolo was there for a while. Jimmy Garoppolo just kind of got a little bit older, got a little bit more expensive. So now you're working with the cheapest starting quarterback contract in the NFL right now, probably, and at least for the next 2 years, I would say, because you probably have to extend him after year 3 when he goes into year 4 if you're planning on paying him. They also got Sam Darnold as a backup, and there's been rumblings that Sam Darnold's the reason why Trey Lance isn't on this team anymore. Because if Sam Darnold didn't outperform Trey Lance would be on this team as the backup, but Sam Darnold was even outperforming Trey Lance. And it seems that this might be an opportunity for Sam Darnold to revitalize his career, build up a more positive reputation in the league, and maybe end up next season. It probably won't be here unless Brock Purdy flops or gets hurt. But build up his reputation, kind of make people forget how poor he was with the Jets and sort of put the focus onto those last couple of games with the Panthers and into how he performed in the preseason with the 49ers, and maybe trick some team into paying him maybe $12 million, $13 million next year. I think that's a possibility as well. And then Brandon Allen sitting there, he's the emergency third quarterback that they decided to keep. Just again, another really cheap option out there for them. But overall, this quarterback room, it seems like they put the guys in place that just are going to make the system work and aren't going to operate so far outside of it, if not outside of it at all. That's going to put this team in jeopardy of not being able to execute on offense and leaving their defense, despite it being so talented, sort of hung out to dry with short fields. This is going to be a very efficient offense with very efficient weapons. And though statistically, Brock Purdy might not reflect the overall ranking that this offense is going to have, especially for a passing grade that we'll see at the end here, I think that this is going to be such an efficient offense because Brock Purdy's not going to deviate from what this system does, which is set up quarterbacks in particular to succeed if they just focus on running the system the exact way it's designed. Now we're going to get to the rushing threats here, and this run game is built across multiple guys. Someone you don't see here, and I'll talk about at the top here, is Kyle Juszczyk, who as a fullback is one of the most functional ones in the league. Really, him and Alec Ingold are the two most important fullbacks in football. They're really keeping the position alive. He's as much of an important aspect of this run game as anyone else. George Kittle's another one, the tight end, who acts as like that sixth offensive lineman. Juszczyk comes in, he acts as like a seventh offensive lineman, and it really helps the running game go. He's really good at, getting to his spot on these outside zone runs. He's a good motion threat, and he also presents a threat in the play action game, which forces these linebackers and these safeties and these dime backers to be playing it more honestly and have to maybe hesitate for half a second to see if it is a play action pass, which is going to open up holes for a guy like Christian McCaffrey, who, as just a straight up first and second down style running back, is still really, really good. He's obviously, his game is being like a more receiving back role, but man, he's just got it all. Really, he's really the complete package. And for the modern NFL, as long as he can stay healthy in the modern NFL, he's probably the best running back in the league and sort of the prototype for the modern NFL running back and the perfect fit for the Shanahan system. Then you got Elijah Mitchell behind him, who he really came out of nowhere as a late round pick last year or 2 years ago. When people were talking about maybe Trey Sermon being the guy who they picked in the third round, I think they took Elijah Mitchell that same year in the sixth round, and he ended up beating Trey Sermon out, and Sermon didn't even make the team. That was sort of like just throwing two things at a certain position, and whichever the best one was, you kept. It just happened to be the sixth round guy. But he's a really good backup, and he can really kind of do the things that Christian McCaffrey can do, just obviously at a turn down level. And then I had to include Deebo Samuel as well as a rushing threat, because he will get opportunities to just carry the football as a running back. His main role is a wide receiver. We'll get to that grade eventually. But you got to include him as a running threat because he's going to probably get the third most carries on the team after McCaffrey and Elijah Mitchell. And then when you even get to the receiving back aspect here, you get Christian McCaffrey, who's the best. He gets a 92 grade. He's really the best. And you get Elijah Mitchell, who's I give an 83 to. He's one of the best in the league as well. But like I said, he's kind of like a poor man's McCaffrey, and there's no shame in that. Elijah Mitchell is a running back one on a lot of rosters in the NFL, and I think the combination of him and McCaffrey and how good McCaffrey is at running routes and how sure-handed he is, you can split McCaffrey out in the slot with Deebo and Ayuk and Kittle and then have Elijah Mitchell in the backfield, and you really haven't given away what's happening because you can still run the football in that situation. You can still drop back to pass, and the running back will be a legitimate threat there. You can run like a fake bubble screen to McCaffrey and then dump it off on a backside screen to Mitchell and get a gigantic opportunity there for a big splash play. Even Kyle Juszczyk is a threat in the running game, like in the passing game, like we talked about. For a fullback, that's a pretty good grade at 65. Jordan Mason's a third running back on the team. You're not going to get much of him in the receiving game. And Tavion Prince-Davis, who was kind of a wasted draft pick last year, which I had screamed at the top of my lungs should have been an offensive lineman, but they decided to go with a day 3/UDFA graded running back who's never going to see the field for this team. He's buried at the bottom of the depth chart, so it was kind of a pick they threw in the fire. But still, this entire running back room in general, even from a depth perspective, they've done such a great job of building it up, and that has a lot to do with the way that the Shanahan system works. I keep going back to the Shanahan system because this offense is really derived from that. It's really driven by the actual system. It's not like a lot of other offenses in the NFL where you adjust around talented players. They kind of just put guys in spots, and then these guys elevate and their talents are really accentuated. So even with Elijah Mitchell on the field, you don't really lose the threat of the running back being a part of the passing game. And it might even be able to almost trick defenses if Christian McCaffrey's on the field and Elijah Mitchell is. It's easy to forget how great Elijah Mitchell is in comparison to the other running backs in the NFL when it comes to being a receiving back, but Christian McCaffrey just happens to be so much better than him that's easily forgotten. So I think that's a huge advantage for this offense as well. Now let's go to the starting receivers and the tight ends. And in the receiving game, we're going to talk about 4 guys in particular here. We'll talk about Debo and Ayuk. Debo gets an 82, Ayuk gets an 80. I think they're very similar talent-wise. I think Debo is just an overall more significant contributor because of his ability to just break tackles. He's more a physical runner. He's like a running back he's like a receiver in a running back's body, which is why you also see him get carries. He's got that like running back mentality almost when he gets the ball. Ayuk is going to be like sort of the opposite of that. I think you're going to get some really good routes out of him. I think he's going to burn people on crossers. I think this could be the year that Ayuk finally performs up to that first round grade. Then, George Kittle gets an 88, one of the best tight ends in the league. Balanced tight end, great in the run game, and just amazing in the receiving game. Probably the best run after catch tight end in the entire league. I think that's where his skill set really comes into play. And you'll see him get super physical too. He'll break off big runs, he'll juke a guy, and then he'll just run someone over. So that unpredictability makes him a giant asset. And I included Kyle Juszczyk in here as well because you'll see him sort of line up as a fullback or a second tight end, and he'll actually become a threat in the run game, in the pass game, whether it be as a tremendous pass protector or as somebody that can go out there, run routes, catch the ball, and break out a pretty good play. People forget how good Kyle Juszczyk actually is, and it's really easy to forget when you have all these other guys around him, Kittle, Ayuk, Debo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey. It's really easy to forget just how effective and good and important to this offense Kyle Juszczyk is. I would feel like I was doing this offense almost a disservice for not including him in some way, shape, or form in every aspect of how this offense operates. And then you even look at some of the depth, Ray McCloud, Jawan Jennings, Ronnie Bell. Like there's some really good third options here for the receivers. So if they even want to go into a more traditional like spread set, Ray McCloud can be a really good gadget guy. Jawan Williams can be a really good guy you can throw in the slot. Ronnie Bell from Michigan quietly could be a breakout guy if given the opportunities. Just a shame that he ended up in this offense where maybe the opportunities won't be as significant unless there's some sort of injury. And you look at some of the tight end depth here. This is where they really don't have all that much with Dwelly and Braden Willis, the rookie, Charlie Werner. They will run 2 tight end sets, but I do also think that there'll be situations where it'll be more single back, and you'll see Kyle Juszczyk sort of take on that second tight end role. But there's just a lot of different guys who can be plugged in for very specific reasons. I think they can be all effective in their own way. I just don't think that these guys that you're seeing right here on this page are going to get as much opportunities because, Christian McCaffrey, Elijah Mitchell, George Kittle, Debo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, that's 5 guys who are going to be taking up a lot of the targets in the passing game. Now we're going to talk about really the only red flag that I have on this team. Like it's really the only issue I take with this team, and it's the talent level, not necessarily how the talent is used, but the overall talent level. I think in any other situation on any other team in most other offenses, you're hitting the panic button with how poor this offensive line is on paper. Trent Williams, put him aside. He's probably top 2-3 offensive tackles in the NFL. Gets an 88 grade here as a pass blocker, and pass blocking is not even the thing he does the best. They got Aaron Banks and Spencer Burford there as your guards, who, man, okay. They drafted these guys in back-to-back years. You gotta, I guess, trust the process a bit that maybe they'll come along. Jake Brendel had the unfortunate responsibility of replacing Alex Mack, who's one of the best centers ever from his time in Atlanta and time in Cleveland, his time here in San Francisco. It was just one banger year after another. But he's been serviceable at the center role. And Colton McKivitz is replacing Mike McGlinchey as the starter at right tackle. I was shocked that McGlinchey went out the door and they really didn't replace him. They just kept everything sort of in-house, which I guess is a strategy in and of itself where you have these guys who at least all know the system. They've all worked in it for at least a year or two, at this point, so they might be able to build some sort of chemistry off of the fact that they're not having to teach anyone terminology or the system or what to look for or where your blocks got to be. So that in and of itself takes less talented guys and puts them in a more winnable situation. But even in the depth, they only kept 9 guys. Matt Pryor, like, that Colts offensive line fell apart because of how bad he was. Good for him to get a job. John Feliciano was the Giants center last year, and he was solid and serviceable to a degree. Jalen Moore, you're not going to get much out of him in the pass game. His real strength is in the run game. So really, as pass blockers, you really only got Feliciano, who could play guard if you needed him to. I just think that the way he's not so significantly better than Banks and Burford. And it's almost like you want to give those guys the reps because they're younger and you want to get those young guys to hopefully be able to develop and hit their ceiling a bit. But man, in the run blocking, it is just brutal. It is so brutal. They're one of the few teams that will just run behind their left tackle almost exclusively at this point. Trent Williams, probably the best run blocking tackle in the NFL. But, like, man, you look at that right side, Burford and McKivitz, they got to start showing something that they're better than what they showed. Even Brendel was not good as a run blocker last year. Aaron Banks was just terrible pretty much overall. But just, it's bad on that right side, projected at least right now. So maybe that's where you'll see George Kittle lined up on the right side when they do that. And, Kyle Juszczyk, on those quick motions across to help out on that right side too, because it's bad. It is bad, and Burford needs to really step up in particular. Aaron Banks, you sort of know what you're going to get. Burford was even worse than that. And you're not getting a lot of help in the depth on the interior either. Jalen Moore is like a swing tackle at this point. So, like, maybe he beats out McKivitz eventually for that right tackle role. Maybe you can kick Jalen Moore into guard. Maybe McKivitz can kick into guard. But it's just not looking like it's going to be an overly talented offensive line at all. On a talent level, it's one of the worst outside of Trent Williams. You take Trent Williams off of this offensive line, you probably have the worst offensive line in the league by like a mile. So this is a red flag for me. The only red flag really I have on this team, and you'll see how it significantly affects the overall grade, particularly of the rushing attack. So just by looking at the positional grades, you could see what stands out here is the offensive line's average overall grade here. You got Trent Williams, who's an 88 pass blocker with the average offensive line grade of a 70. So you take that 88 out, what does that look like? You got a 92 graded run blocker in Trent Williams with an overall average run blocking grade of 64.8. Maybe I'm too harsh on these guys, but I've seen a lot of other people talk about this offensive line, and they're not high on these guys either. It's really Trent Williams and then everybody else. It's very system dependent. So, yeah, the Shanahan system is going to be doing a lot of heavy lifting for this offensive line. And you can see how that 64.8 affects the overall grade for the rush offense, which brings it down to 22nd. It's 22nd graded rush offense for me. Now, it won't perform in that way because of the system. I keep harping back to the system. They have the second best offensive grade. Now, imagine if that offensive line had any other type of pass blocking going on either. Probably be the number one. And it would probably end up being like maybe the number 1, number 2 overall offense in the league instead of number 6 if that offensive line was better. Now, if this offensive line, if these talents out there, if they outperform those grades and the system executes itself the way that it does, then this could be the best offense in football. It very easily could. But it's going to be a team that the offense is going to be so system dependent, and then the defense is going to do, I think, a lot of the heavy lifting throughout the year, but it's certainly a defense that's ready to do so. So now let's talk about the pass rush, and I'm going to assume Nick Bosa gets signed before the first game, or at least if he doesn't by the first game, he'll be by the second game, kind of like Chris Jones in Kansas City. He gets a 91 grade, one of the best edge rushers in the entire league. Then next to him, free agent signing Javon Hargrave, who had an amazing year in Philadelphia last year as an interior pass rusher. He is one of the best interior pass rushers in the league, if not the best, based upon how he played last year compared to everybody else. He's way up there. And then there's Eric Armstead, a veteran, who was kind of like a hybrid defensive end slash defensive tackle when they were running a 3-4 defense back in the Aldon Smith days. He was like that 3-4 defensive end. Now he's just like a full-time interior guy. And then they brought Cleveland Ferrell over from the Raiders, I believe he played. I believe he did play with the Raiders again last year. And he's sort of in a position where he's going to be legitimately having an opportunity to compete for snaps. I think the pressure's a little bit off of him. This might be a really good situation for him to come into. And I think he's a sneaky pick for a breakout guy if he can get onto the field. He's going to be competing with Drake Jackson a lot, especially with Bosa, assuming Bosa gets out there full-time for most, if not all, of the regular season. But it really, in terms of being a pass rusher, him and Drake Jackson are the ones that are in competition together. Kerry Hyder and Austin Bryant, I don't expect them to be anything other than real depth pieces there. The competition is Drake Jackson and Cleveland Ferrell. For the interior guys, there is no competition. They got probably one of the best interior groups in the entire league, and not a lot going on after. They got first-round pick Javon Kinlaw, who hasn't done a damn thing. They basically traded him straight up for DeForest Buckner, and it hasn't worked. That's why they brought in Javon Hargrave, is because this hasn't worked. Javon Hargrave is pretty much what they wanted Javon Kinlaw to be. And he isn't that. So his fifth-year option won't get picked up, barring some type of career renaissance happening here. And then they got Kalia Davis, who's not going to be much in terms of an interior pass rusher, but I think we'll see him perhaps contribute on early downs, which we'll get to now. So we look at this front four, even against the run, and Nick Bosa is still great against the run. Javon Hargrave still really good as an interior run stuffer. Really and truly, they got, and then, even Cleveland Ferrell is still the better option there, the best option as a second defensive end in both aspects. So and Eric Armstead, of course, as well. Super balanced in that sense. Just, at the wrong half of his career. So he's just a little bit of a worse version of what he used to be, but still very balanced, still really good in all aspects. I sort of look at him the same way you look at Fletcher Cox, where it's like he's still good. He's just not who he used to be. Age catches up with everybody, especially when you're playing an interior defensive lineman role. You take a pounding every single week. But still, what a great group. And then this is where Cleveland Ferrell and Drake Jackson, again, competing. They're very similar in terms of how I think that they're capable of performing. Drake Jackson coming into his second season. Cleveland Ferrell, I think, entering his fifth. Maybe his fourth, unless if he was cut after 3 years. I think it's his fifth year coming in this year. So I expect those guys to really be the ones competing all year round for snaps. And I think that's really where the rotation is going to happen. And one of them's going to get an opportunity to break out, and the one that does is the one that's going to take up that mantle as being the number 2 defensive end on this roster. And then I talked about Kalia Davis a little bit earlier. This is really where he'll thrive, and this is the only place where I could see there being any type of rotation. You give Eric Armstead a bit of a break, maybe Javon Hargrave gets a bit of a break, and Kalia Davis finds his way onto the field. And Javon Kinlaw, like I said, he needs to show something in some aspect of the game. Either be a great run stuffer or be a good pass rusher, be at least somebody that they could use that'll help with the depth of this interior defensive line in particular. Now we're going to take a look at shockingly, what probably is the strength of this team, which is their top 2 linebackers. They got the best linebacker in football, Fred Warner, who gets an 85 in pass coverage, and kind of like Trent Williams, that's not even the best thing that he does. Same thing with Drake Greenlaw there, who gets a 73. That's a really good grade for a number 2 linebacker. He's not nearly as good as Fred Warner, but man, Drake Greenlaw, he's extremely talented. Now, one thing that they did that I was very surprised at is they did keep quite a bit of linebackers here. They kept 6 linebackers, which most teams were keeping 4 or 5. Oren Burks is really the only option they have for a third linebacker when it comes to pass coverage. Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles, Jalen Graham, and D. Winters, 2 rookies they picked up. D. Winters is a good blitzer. Other than that, I don't think you're going to get a whole lot out of him. I don't, that TCU team was good. They had a bit of a Cinderella run there, and he was one of the stars of that defense. So I understand taking him, and then hopefully you can bring something out of him. But I don't know where those opportunities are necessarily going to come from. I think we got 3 guys here, 4 guys really, that are just going to get featured on special teams. Oren Burks might get some rotational work. But in the run game, man, Fred Warner gets a 90. Dre Greenlaw gets an 80. So when they're in those running situations, it's going to be extremely difficult to run against this team. Even when you go back and look at the front 4 for the defensive line, you got a really good defensive line and then 2 really great linebackers. One of the best Mike linebacker in the league. Then you got Dre Greenlaw as a great compliment to him in every aspect. And then Oren Burks, if you're running a more traditional 4-3, can get out there on the field, and he's better than a lot of options that other people have. So he does present a good depth piece here as a third linebacker. He's probably the quintessential third linebacker because he can give you a little bit of something in the pass game where it's like, he's serviceable, but in the run game, he's pretty solid, above average. So as a third linebacker, it's really good to have somebody like him. When they lost Azeez Al-Shahir, who was filling that role last year. So maybe there'll be a lot more 2 linebacker sets. And again, like the other depth guys, I don't know why they kept him. It had to be for special teams purposes. It just had to be. And hoping that maybe somebody breaks out and you get a third linebacker that isn't Oren Burks. I don't understand. Oren Burks is pretty good. He's a really good depth piece to have in comparison to what the rest of the league has. But it was just an interesting 53-man roster decision to me. It really was. Now let's talk about the secondary. And you can see this is a solid secondary in pass coverage. With what they have going on in the first 2 levels, with that front 4 and with the linebackers, the jobs of these guys are very easy. They're allowed to play super aggressive, and they do play super aggressive. And you'll see that also in how they grade out in run support. It's amazing. It's the best run support defensive back group, I think, in the entire league. And they're probably like top in terms of overall talent across the board. Probably top 12. Charvarius Ward really had a great year. Isaiah Oliver coming over from Atlanta, I think he's going to have an interesting role to play. Diamador Lenoir is going to get opportunities of playing on the outside as that corner too. Tayshaun Gibson, that veteran, who's going to come up, make some plays, mostly in the run game, be like an 8th man in the box, but play that closer to the line safety. And then Tuolona Hufanga had that breakout year last year, where he really had some great shining moments. And I expect him to get, perhaps after this year, hopefully grading out, because he's a really balanced safety, a great 3-down all-purpose safety to have, at least what he was last year. And I expect him, if he can play some consistent ball and repeat what he did last year, you'll see him being graded in the 80s, I think, in pass coverage and in run support both. Some of the depth pieces they have, they drafted rookie Jair Brown, who's going to be the third option here. He maybe even gets on the field with Tayshaun Gibson, maybe being dedicated to more early down work. But I think he'll be slowly and gradually worked into that role. George Odom's a veteran option. They drafted Darrell Luter Jr. They had Samuel Womack Jr. They don't really have a whole lot of corner depth, I would say. But I think the safety room is quite good in terms of their ability in the passing game. Now just look at these grades for run support. And no, I'm not a 49ers fan. This team is just really, really good. And this defense plays so aggressively. And when you got Charvarius Ward, who grades out so highly in run defense for a cornerback, when you got Tayshaun Gibson, when you got Isaiah Oliver, who will be playing in the slot, Tuolona Hufanga, who's going to be able to come up and make some tackles in the run game as well. Diamador Lenoir is no slouch in the run game either. Like, this group is just so incredibly talented. and they're so incredibly reliable. I don't know how teams are going to move the ball against this defense in any facet at this point. Yeah, I guess if you can get protection up front, you could maybe beat them downfield in the pass game because they don't really have like that quintessential true number one corner in pass coverage. But you're not going to be able to run the ball ever against the 49ers, it doesn't seem. Even some of these depth pieces outside of Jair Brown, George Odom, really good option as a third safety in early downs. Samuel Womack and Darrell Luter and Ambry Thomas, you're going to see them get a lot of work on special teams, but you could throw them into a situation on early downs as well where they can get opportunities, and they're going to be some sure tacklers. So if you get into a dime situation and you want to put in like George Odom or you want to put in Samuel Womack, you're not going to be necessarily giving up a whole lot where teams might be able to be like, oh, we can run the ball here and really exploit them because they got all these corners out here. No, these defensive backs are going to make tackles. They're going to stick their nose in there, and they're going to be really aggressive. They're going to hit you hard, and they're going to wrap you up. There's not going to be a whole lot of missed tackles from the secondary either. So it's a very, very important and significant part of this defense is this defensive backroom's ability in both aspects. They're really, really probably, when you take into account their ability in the run game and the pass game, probably the best defensive back group in the entire league. So just amazing. Just an amazing defensive group. So much talent, and the talent is spread out everywhere. You get a lot of defenses where they have glaring weaknesses. They got a star in one aspect of the game at pretty much every position group. Nick Bosa, Javon Hargrave, Fred Warner. I would even throw Charvarius Ward in there. They got somebody at every level, and it's just, you're going to see how greatly it reflects. And yes, it's my number one pass defense, my number one rush defense, and my number one overall defense in general. This is the heart and soul of this football team. This is what I was talking about with Steve Wilks and how it's basically a no-lose situation for him. He is being put in a situation with all this talent where this team is going to continue to be driven by the defense and the offense with this offensive system, the Shanahan system. This is why this team is always going to be in the hunt. This is why this team's a Super Bowl contender, because those two aspects, the offense and the defense, complement each other so incredibly well. Now we're taking a look at the schedule, and I got them going 15-2. I got them getting caught by Seattle in Seattle, and then by Baltimore towards the end of the year. They got a tough game against Philly. They got a tough game against Cincinnati as well. I think Dallas and the Giants will give them a hard time. But in general, I just think that they're so good. They're going to be able to take advantage of so many of the weaknesses that like Cincinnati's main weakness is sort of the same as San Francisco's, which is the offensive line. Can imagine what that is going to look like, Cincinnati versus San Francisco, when that 49ers defensive line gets unleashed on them. Same sort of thing with my New York Giants. Outside of Andrew Thomas, you're kind of worried about what that offensive line can do, specifically on the right side. So that could be exploited as well and be a long day for Daniel Jones. Philly's offensive line does match up really well. They've got a great offensive line, probably the best in the league. So watching that battle will be really interesting, especially in Philadelphia at that point in the season. I think you could easily switch the Seattle and Philadelphia game, but I just really don't think this team's going to lose. They might find a third loss in here, but I think that they've got everything in place right now. And it's a very favorable schedule when you really break it down. The Rams twice, the Cardinals twice. They get Minnesota, they get Tampa Bay. It's Washington. It's a really favorable schedule for such a talented football team. And just a quick summary here, a lot of ones. A lot of number ones appearing here. They got the number one team in the league, number one team in the conference, obviously winning the division, best running defense, best pass defense, best total defense, the second best pass offense, the third best coaching staff, the sixth total offense. The only red flag I have, and it's what drags down that run offense grade, is the offensive line. Trent Williams needs to stay healthy throughout the whole year. If he goes down, then yes, I think that offensive line will be so bad it could potentially lead to this offense at least falling apart. But I still think the defense is just so incredibly talented that it may not matter. And there you have it, my number one team in my 2023 NFL Deep Dive series, the 49ers. Like and subscribe and comment, do all that stuff. It's been a long 32 videos. Thank you for the people out there that watched every single one of them. If you're new to this and you're just seeing this now, you can click the playlist that's going to pop up on the side of my head that you can then go and then watch your favorite team and what I think about them. And if you're a Carolina fan, you can yell at me with the rest of them. This was a lot of fun. We'll get into the mock drafts next. Mock draft, the first one's going to be based on my rankings here in this deep dive series. So it's going to be 32-1. That's why I ranked them that way, and it's going to be reflected in that mock draft. So thank you guys for coming. I hope to see you guys for the rest of the time that I'm making videos on this channel and that we continue to grow. And then hopefully I can start getting some money for this and it's not just, a fun, free hobby. Thank you guys for being here. I'll see you guys next video.